Hello and welcome to the JSA studio. I am your host, as always, Nathan, and today we are going to be talking about the 2023-2024 college football Heisman race. Who I think is a real contender, who I think isn't, who might surprise some people by contending, and who may disappoint. With that said, let's go ahead and jump right into it with who's probably not going to win it. And that is any defensive player represented by Will Anderson, who should have won the Heisman 2 years ago, and any wide receiver with Marvin Harrison Jr. Now, Marvin Harrison Jr. is more of a specific case as well. I just don't believe he's going to put up the numbers that is going to be required for him to even be in contention for the award. Also, 2020 was a really weird situation where Devonta Smith won it. He was absolutely deserving of the award, in my opinion, but it was 2020. It was weird. The whole year was weird. So I don't think you can count on that happening again. And defensive players, perhaps in the future, maybe next off season or something, I'll do a video where I'll go back through each of the past 20 years or whatever and pick who actually was the best player in football and therefore should have won the Heisman. But defensive players just get snubbed in the Heisman. They don't get talked about. They probably should, but they don't. They're never going to win the award. They're never really going to compete for it either, which just makes what Charles Woodson did in 1997 even more impressive to me. Let's go ahead and move on to some more specific players rather than just general sort of positions with Blake Corum, J.J. McCarthy, and Caleb Williams. And this is going to piss some people off. Let's go ahead and work left to right here. Let's start with Blake Corum. Number one, I would be astonished if Blake Corum got more than 200 carries during the first 12 games. I think they're really going to rest him and try to have him healthy for the two important games they play in the regular season and then the Big Ten Championship and the College Football Playoff, hopefully. I think Donovan Edwards is going to get much more of a workload. I think there's also a very good possibility that true freshman running back Cole Cabana is going to end up stealing some reps as a running back 3 as well and be effective in that role. So I just don't think Blake Corum is going to get the numbers that are going to have to happen in order for him to get into Heisman contention. And J.J. McCarthy, everybody's talking about J.J. McCarthy. I don't believe it. I haven't seen high-level quarterback play from him. Well, I shouldn't say quarterback play because I have seen high-level running ability out of him from the quarterback position, and that is part of what quarterback play is. But I have not, with him throwing the football, seen high-level stuff from him. And I've got the numbers to back it up. When he throws the ball 25 times or more in a game, he is 112 for 182, which is 61.5%, which is okay. I mean, that's right towards the bottom of acceptable. And his touchdown to interception ratio is 10-3, which is about 3-1, which is also that's good. I was going to say acceptable. That's solid. But when you look at Caleb Williams, who threw the ball more than 25 times in every single game except for 2, the first game of the season and against Notre Dame, you see a 42-5 touchdown to interception ratio and a 66.6% completion percentage, as well as averaging almost 325 yards per game, along with 10 rushing touchdowns and being just spectacular in terms of being able to extend plays and run around, which I think JJ has the ability to at least be comparable to Caleb Williams in that regard, but I do not believe he has the capability of putting up those kinds of numbers when there are going to be quarterbacks that are going to put up those kinds of numbers on good teams. So I just don't see a scenario where he ends up being in the Heisman conversation as anything more than like the guy who gets the 4th amount of votes like Duggan did last year because he's on a team that wins, even though he probably doesn't deserve to be there. And Caleb Williams' numbers are consistent with what is expected of a quarterback in order to win the Heisman Trophy. And there is no situation where J.J. McCarthy gets to those numbers. It does not exist. And I do not believe the narrative will be strong enough for him to overcome that reality. Now, you may be wondering, with all those numbers that I just fed you about how great Caleb Williams is, how is he not like the favorite to go back to back? And the answer to that is nobody ever goes back to back, since nobody gave a damn about the awards in the 70s when they gave 2 to Archie Griffin. In order for Caleb Williams to go back to back, he would have to surpass the numbers that he put up last year in a spectacular fashion. And it's not impossible for that to happen, but I think it's unlikely. I think, to be entirely honest with you, I think USC is a much better football team this year than it was last year. And I honestly think his numbers are probably going to take a little bit of a dip this year. But the only real way that he's going to win the Heisman is if he comes out and puts up Joe Burrow 2019 numbers. Like, he would have to beat his totals by 1,000 passing yards and like 10 passing touchdowns. So he'd have to get to like 5,500 passing yards and 52 touchdowns. I don't think that's going to happen. Hence why I have Caleb Williams in the probably not happening section of this video. Moving on, we're going to talk about some guys that are just absolute shots in the dark. You know, these are guys that have all the talent in the world, but whether it be because of inconsistencies like Sam Rattler, or injuries like Quinn Ewers, or in the case of Joe Milton, having to transfer after, I'm quoting Sam Webb here, Michigan cooled on him, and then having to sit behind Hendon Hooker. For those of you unaware, I don't actually think Michigan cooled on Joe Milton. I was just referencing some Twitter drama. It was called Twitter then, now it's called X, but I don't want to get into that. I don't actually remember this guy's name. It's like Yoder or Yaddle. I don't remember that guy's name, but he's very infamous in Michigan circles because he's kind of an asshole, and he jokingly kind of tweeted out when Aaron Scott, I believe it was, committed to Ohio State, he said Michigan cooled on him, and then like put a little attribution to it saying Sam Webb, and then Sam Webb got kind of butthurt. I'm not trying to defend Yoder here, but it was kind of funny to me. It was very clearly meant to be a joke, but that's why I decided to reference that there. I just thought it would be funny. But these 3 guys, in terms of my confidence of them being able to play really well, I'm going to rank them here real quick. I'm going to put Spencer Rattler at 3, Joe Milton at 2, and Quinn Ewers at 1. Of these 3, the one most likely to jump into legitimate Heisman contention is, in my opinion, Quinn Ewers. I don't think the Big 12 is very strong this year. I think Texas is very clearly the best team in the Big 12 this year, at least on paper. Obviously, when we start getting to actual games, a lot of stuff can change. I don't think anybody had TCU making the playoffs and winning a playoff game last year, but that's what happened. So these are the high ceiling guys. These are the guys that, unlike, J.J. McCarthy, in my opinion, have the ceiling to put up the kind of numbers that is going to be needed for a quarterback to win the Heisman. I mean, Quinn Ewers has an elite receiving core. Spencer Rattler has some really good receivers and some really good tight ends as well. I believe Tennessee has done a good job at reloading at the wide receiver position and having other options to throw the ball to. Plus, they all can move around and extend plays, make some highlight plays, and they all have the potential to be very narratively satisfying, which is an important aspect of the Heisman Trophy. Very often, the player with the better story wins over the best player in the country. Joe Milton's story is pretty obvious. It's kind of the same with Spencer Rattler. Their old teams gave up on them. They transferred, and they were phoenixes. They died, turned to ash, and then were reborn better than before. There's a pretty clear narrative arc there. And with Quinn Ewers, if Texas ends up competing and making the college football playoff, I would be astonished if he wasn't at least a Heisman finalist, unless he gets hurt, which I hope doesn't happen. I hope nobody ever gets hurt. Up next are the dark horses, guys that I think are going to play better than people are expecting them to play. And going left to right here, we have Sam Hartman at Notre Dame, Braylon Allen at Wisconsin, and Cade Klubnik at Clemson. Klubnik had an up and down true freshman season this past year after he took over for DJ Uiagalelei, who subsequently transferred to Oregon State. I think he's going to play much better than people are maybe expecting him to play. I think he's going to be a high-level quarterback for Clemson. I think Clemson is very likely to revert to their old ways. Only difference being that they actually have to play two real football teams this year in Notre Dame and Florida State. Braylon Allen in the middle there. He also had a bit of a down year. Last year, he was very, very good as a true freshman. And this year, under Luke Fickell, I fully expect the passing game to be the best that it's maybe ever been in the history of Wisconsin football, and I think Braylon Allen is going to feast because of that. I think early on in the year, it's going to be ground and pound and hard play action, and then they're going to get in a game where they need to throw the ball a whole lot, and they're going to prove that they actually can. That's just going to open up more room for Allen to run the football, and he's going to put up monster stats, in my opinion. He is maybe not a lock, but damn close to me to be a first-team All-American at one of the two running back spots, and a contender for the Doaka Walker and several other awards. Last but certainly not least, we have Sam Hartman, who, to my friend, I only have one, I have been singing the praises of for the past 3 seasons. He's a very, very good quarterback and very efficient. He can move around a little bit. I fully expect Notre Dame's offense to be much better. I also think there is a little bit of addition by subtraction with Tommy Rees not calling plays anymore. So I think Sam Hartman, if they can pull off 2 of the 3 toughest games on their schedule versus USC, versus Clemson, and versus Ohio State, if they can win 2 of those 3 games and Sam Hartman puts up similar numbers to what he's put up before, then I think he could be a serious Heisman contender. I think Notre Dame has an underrated offensive line. I think this is a team that is going to be hungry and wants to prove that they are still the, maybe not perennial contender that they were under Brian Kelly, but still a Notre Dame program that can still compete at a very high level. So these are wild cards, players that I don't necessarily believe in, but could potentially, if they go off in a game or two, they've got some big games on the schedule. If they can go off on the national stage, can capture the momentum and win the Heisman Trophy legitimately. And those 3 players are, going from left to right, Bo Nix, Kyle McCord, and Quinshon Judkins. Let's start with Judkins. Ole Miss, I'm not sure, is going to be a very good football team this year. I think they can be competent. I think 8-4 is perhaps a ceiling, but if I'm going to be entirely honest with you, Alabama is maybe more beatable this year than they've been since Nick Saban's first year at Alabama. And he is going to put up monster stats in that Lane Kiffin offense. So if he can go for like 250 and 3 or 4 touchdowns against Alabama and Ole Miss pulls off the upset, he could get vaulted into the Heisman Trophy talks and could potentially end up winning the award. Kyle McCord is here because we really just don't know what he's going to be. I don't think his ceiling is higher than CJ Stroud's. I think his ceiling is just a tad bit lower than CJ Stroud. That being said, CJ Stroud was a Heisman finalist in consecutive years, so he can absolutely win the award. He has the best receiving core in the country. He is still probably going to have a top 15, top 20 offensive line and a very, very good group of running backs, including Mayan Williams, who is probably a top 5, maybe top 3 running back in the country for me. So he's going to have all of the opportunities to put up massive numbers, and if Ohio State can win the Big Ten and make the playoffs, then he does have a decent chance to win the award. Bo Nix is the last guy. Ironically, Oregon fans, he isn't even the player on your team that I think has the best chance to win the Heisman. We'll talk about that player in the next section. But Bo Nix is the epitome of a wild card to me. He could have an excellent season, and Ole Miss could end up 10-2, though, in which case he stands no chance of winning the Heisman Trophy, even if he was like clearly the best quarterback in the country. If you don't win and you don't play in the South, you have no chance of winning the Heisman Trophy, because voters in the South would rather vote for Stetson fucking Bennett than anybody who doesn't play in the SEC. But if Oregon ends up 11-1 or 12-1 or 13-0, and he has a good season, perhaps a statistically similar season to this past year, maybe a little bit better, and Oregon wins the Pac-12 and they end up either 12-1 or 13-0, he has a good chance to make the Heisman Finals and potentially win the award, depending upon how things break out, depending upon how things fall during the season. Up next, we have what I am calling the real contenders tier, or the tier of people that I think are legitimately going to be in discussions throughout the whole season when it comes to talking about the Heisman Trophy. And that is, from left to right, Trey Benson, Florida State, Bucky Irving, Oregon, and Drake May, North Carolina. Now, we'll start with Drake May. Drake May is pretty much guaranteed to be a top 2 pick in this upcoming NFL draft. The only reason I don't say guaranteed is because there is a possibility that some of these more freakishly talented guys could have a breakout year and end up usurping him, and Drake May ends up going 3rd rather than 2nd overall. He was utterly phenomenal last year. This year, I think he's going to be even better, potentially. I'm not sure North Carolina is going to be a better team, so to say, but I think the ACC is significantly weaker this year than it was last year, so they would really only need to upset Clemson or Florida State in order to seriously be in that conversation. And it's possible. It's not impossible. I would consider it unlikely, but I don't think it's impossible. Bucky Irving in the middle. I love Bucky Irving. He is one of the most explosive players in all of college football. He's electric. He's a very, very, very good running back who I think is going to be much better this year than he was last year, and he was already phenomenal last year. I think Oregon in year 2 is going to take a step forward offensively and defensively under Dan Lanning. I think they might be looking to be a little bit more balanced. They did throw the ball quite a bit last year, so I think he's going to have an opportunity to get more carries than he did last year. And the Pac-12 is just falling apart. I think there is a massive chasm between the top 4 teams and everybody else, with really only like UCLA being in like the middle. So he's going to have multiple opportunities because Oregon does play USC and Utah this year. So he's going to have quite a few opportunities to really make a statement and be that guy and put himself in the conversation for the Heisman Trophy. Trey Benson is also going to have multiple opportunities, starting with week 1 versus LSU, to come onto the scene and prove that he is a legitimate threat to anybody who wants to win the Heisman Trophy, as well as contend for the Doak Walker Award and potentially a first-team All-American spot. He's very, very talented. He can catch the ball. He can run inside, outside. He can break tackles. And I think Florida State's offense is going to be maybe unstoppable this year. I think their offensive line is tremendously better than it was last year. So you could see just an explosion from Florida State this year. And I believe he is going to be a major factor in that Florida State offense and in turning that program around completely. Last year you had the good year. This year has to be the great year. The last tier here is preseason favorites. And these are the 3 guys that I believe right now are the 3 players legitimately competing for the Heisman Trophy. I think Michael Penix is going to break Washington and potentially even Pac-12 records as the Pac-12 rides gently into the sunset. I think Jordan Travis is going to put up potentially Heisman caliber numbers in like 12 games and then like 2 or 3 more games of 300 yards and 4 or 5 touchdowns. So I think he's going to have a really, really good year. I think Jayden Daniels as well is going to put up a lot of numbers. I think LSU is a much better team than they were last year. I think their offensive line is way better. I think their receiving core is way better. I think their defense has a chance to take a step forward and be utterly dominant. Florida State, all around, is looking like an elite football team. I think potentially the most important game in all of college football is that week 1 game between LSU and Florida State. And, you can make an argument Alabama, Texas, maybe, but I don't think so. I think it's LSU and Florida State, and I think that's pretty clear. I think that's the game. That's like the most important of college football, because if Florida State loses to LSU and LSU doesn't even win the SEC, then people are going to say Florida State isn't real, even if they beat Clemson twice in the ACC. And if LSU loses to Florida State and then ends up as like a 1 conference loss SEC champion, so they're 11-2, they're going to be like, oh, they couldn't even beat Florida State or something like that. So that game is just so important, and whoever wins that game, if they play really, really well, it could be like, oh yeah, this is the guy that everybody has to outperform this year in order to win the Heisman Trophy. Michael Penix, I think Washington has a real chance to win the Pac-12. I think they probably have the 3rd best chance, in my opinion, behind USC at 1 and Oregon at 2. I would put Utah 4. I would put Washington ahead of Utah, and they have maybe the 2nd best receiving core in all of college football out there with Duzane and McClellan and all of them, 2 elite wide receivers and several other high caliber weapons, as well as a very, very good play caller, in my opinion. Washington is a sneaky team this year. Up next, I'm going to delay a video and talk about all this conference realignment and why I fucking hate it. But that is all that I have for you today. So go ahead and like if you liked the video, subscribe if you want to see more content like this. Go ahead and leave me a comment if you disagreed with me at any point in this video, or if you just have something to say. But let's keep it civil. After all, what do I know? I'm just some asshole. I'll see you next time.